What's up, my guys and geeks? Percy Jackson and the Olympians is one of the most popular fictional novel series in the last few decades. And with the Percy Jackson TV series set to release soon, it seems like all anybody wants to talk about is the son of Poseidon and his friends.
Yeah, what he said.
So I decided I'd jump on this train and we could talk about Percy Jackson. And while I do want to discuss Percy and his friends in later Geek Space episodes, today I thought we'd focus on the reason why demigods are called demigods. So today we're going to rank the Olympians from the worst to the best. Before I get started, don't forget to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Give me your ranking of all 14 major Olympians, or if you don't feel up to that, just who are a few of your favorites and who are a few of your least favorites. And before we begin, I should clarify that I'm counting the 12 Olympians on the Council of Olympus as Olympians, and I'm also counting Hades and Hestia, because they are both children of Kronos, and both really should be on this list. Alright, starting off in last place, we have Hera. And you'd think that the goddess of marriage and queen of the gods would be a little more likable than Hera actually is.
He's wrong! You're wrong!
But when we get to meet Hera and really get to know about who she is, we discover she's a narcissistic perfectionist who has a very strict idea of what the perfect family and perfect world and perfect outcome of every scenario should look like. And she's very cruel to anybody who doesn't fit within that paradigm. We meet her son Hephaestus, who is deformed due to birthing complications. And because he's deformed and doesn't fit into her idea of a perfect family, she casts him out of Olympus and refuses to invite him or acknowledge him to anything as her son. And later, when she's guiding Percy and Annabeth through the labyrinth, she refuses to provide safe passage for Nico D'Angelo simply because he's the son of Hades and because he doesn't fit in her idea of a perfect outcome. And then when Annabeth spurns her and rightly tells her that she's acting horribly, instead of taking this criticism and trying to improve herself, Hera decides to be the pettiest of all the gods and send her sacred animal, the cow, after Annabeth. So
it's random.
Something that's so utterly ridiculous that it just proves how petty Hera is. And then in the Heroes of Olympus sequel series, we get to see her Roman persona, Juno, who takes Percy from Annabeth, wipes his mind, leaves him with a pack of wolves for several months, and then drops him at the doorstep of the Roman camp just so things can play out as she wants them to.
It's overkill.
So overall, throughout the entire series, we see that Hera is one of the most manipulative gods in the entire series, and as such, she's at the bottom of the list. Next up, in 13th place, we have Demeter.
Who?
And if you don't know who the character is, I wouldn't blame you, because she's not a very big character in the series. Basically, all we see of her is her in the underworld, nagging her daughter Persephone and insulting her brother Hades. And essentially, throughout the course of the series, basically all we see is that she cares about nature, which of course comes with her being the goddess of, I think she's the goddess of agriculture. She cares about grain. She likes cereal. That's basically all we get to her character.
Odd.
But she's never, despite the fact that the Olympians, despite the fact that her very existence is at stake in the fight against Kronos, she's never really motivated or desiring to fight. It's only when Nico is able to convince Hades to come fight and help the Olympians that she decides to actually get off her butt and do something. So while she's not lower than Hera, because at worst all she is neutral, her lazy and lackluster tendencies put her near the bottom of the list.
Burn!
Next up, in 12th place, we have the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite. And she's got basically all the character traits you would expect from someone who's the goddess of beauty. Shallow, superficial, and incredibly vain. She decides to give Percy a bunch of trouble in his romantic life simply because she thinks it's more interesting and provides for greater romantic tension. And that's basically all we see her do. She's always described as being exceedingly shallow. She's described as having a superficial beauty about her, but it's nowhere near that of characters who are more natural and less shallow, like Calypso.
Fake.
So she's not a very considerate person. She's very selfish and self-centered, and as such, we really don't get to see all that much of her being a good character. We don't necessarily see her being negative towards our heroes or trying to harm them or hurt them, which is why she's above Hera on this list, but we really don't get to see all that much of her actually being a good person. So all we're left with is a vain and shallow goddess. Next up, in 11th place, we have the god of war, Ares.
This was Ares, the god of war.
And Ares is an interesting case because his desire for war and conflict basically blinds him to anything else. And of course, he does have the rivalry with Percy where they fight over the lightning bolt and the helm of darkness and over Percy not giving Ares the proper respect. And ever since that fight, Ares has been going after Percy. He hates Percy. All his children hate Percy. He's just a really nasty guy. And he's also not the sharpest person in the tool shed. He's not the smartest Olympian because he lets Luke, a teenager, convince him to start a war amongst the gods for very little reason other than he loves violence and bloodshed.
Geez, that's embarrassing.
So he's not the smartest god. He's actively mean and negative towards Percy and puts him in some very dangerous situations. And so he's near the bottom of the list. Next up, in 10th place, we have Hades.
Set the Minotaur to abduct her.
The god of the underworld. And Hades is an interesting case because he's actually, generally speaking, more noble than his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon. He's the only one who doesn't break the pact of the big three and doesn't have children after the prophecy, the great prophecy has been given and the pact has been agreed to. He's the only one that honors that pact. We see that he's really run down from all the dead flooding the underworld, that he has lost his riches, that he's lost the comfort he used to experience, that he's not given a seat among the Olympians, that he's regarded as lesser than simply because he's the god of the dead, and that everybody really looks down upon him.
It's not fair.
But even with all of that, we still can't deny that he's a very shallow and petty character. When Zeus strikes against Hades and winds up killing Maria d'Angelo, Hades blames the Oracle simply because she gave the prophecy regarding Zeus's wrath. He can't get back at Zeus because Zeus is too powerful, so instead he curses the Oracle. And
that seems unnecessary.
we see time and time again that while he doesn't necessarily act against the Olympians, he's certainly not all that eager to help them either. He is redeemed a bit when he comes and helps in the fight against Kronos, but overall, he's just not that nice of a character. But I guess that kind of comes with being the Lord of the Dead. Next up, in 9th place, we have Diogenes.
Christians have a guy who can do this trick in reverse. That's a god.
The god of wine. And Mr. D is a bit of an interesting case because Zeus has punished him and sentenced him to several hundred years acting as the camp director at Camp Half-Blood. And as a result, he's exceedingly bitter. He's not allowed to take in any wine as a part of his curse and punishment. And he takes it out by being grumpy and cruel towards all the campers around him, especially Percy. But when we get past all the gruff and all the crusty exterior, we see that he's actually a pretty decent guy.
Why do you lie?
When he actually tries to be, he does have wise insight and he can be helpful towards Percy and his friends. We see him show a lot more care for his children, Castor and Pollux, than most of the other gods ever show for any of their demigod children. So we see that he, despite all odds, is a caring father, that ultimately it's really not his fault that he's stuck guarding Camp Half-Blood. It's Zeus's fault because Zeus punished him for something he really shouldn't have been punished for. And we see that despite him being a bit cruel towards Percy at times, he is still overall a pretty decent guy. Next up, in 8th place, we have Zeus,
Me the bones, lightning thief.
the king of the gods and the god of the air. And Zeus is an interesting character because we don't get to spend all that much time interacting with him. We mostly only see him in a group setting when he's interacting with the other Olympians. And what we see of him overall is that a lot of the time he just is in the interest of acting justly. He's basically acts as the chief mediator of all the Olympian council meetings and tallies up the votes and all. But we also see that he can be a bit foolish at times, as when he immediately blames Poseidon for the loss of the lightning bolt and declares that he's going to go to war with him if he doesn't get the bolt returned. For some reason that we don't understand, he seems to think Poseidon is guilty, when quite obviously Poseidon has nothing to do with this and is telling him he has nothing to do with this. And then, of course, there's the inexcusable fact of Zeus killing Maria D'Angelo and trying to kill Bianca and Nico D'Angelo simply because they're children of Hades.
Boo!
And honestly, that act is what brings him so many places down the list, just because I find it simply inexcusable. There was no need to kill them. He just killed them because he didn't want his power to be threatened. Next up, in 7th place, we have Athena, the goddess of wisdom.
I'm so proud of you.
And Athena is like basically the midpoint between the likable gods and the less likable gods. She's about as neutral as you can possibly have a character throughout the entire series. As the goddess of wisdom, her every decision is based purely on what's logical and what makes tactical sense. She doesn't have petty grudges. She doesn't try to mess with any of the heroes simply because she dislikes them or because she has issue with them. And she's willing to spare Percy on multiple occasions, even though it somewhat goes against her logical thoughts. But just because she's always so negative on Percy and always so untrusting of him until he finally, saves the entirety of Olympus, and that's when she's finally willing to let up on him after 5 books of being pretty strict against him. That's what keeps her at just that neutral slot for me. But she's not a bad goddess. She's a very wise and considerate goddess. She just forgets to put emotion into the equation. Alright, in 6th place, we have Hephaestus, the god of fire in the forges.
Hephaestus will do what he can.
And from this point on, I basically am positive and like all these gods. Hephaestus is presented to us as extremely misshapen and deformed and kind of a hermit and socially awkward as a result of being cast out of Olympus. His wife Aphrodite isn't very faithful towards him. He's not respected by a lot of the other Olympians, but he is respected by demigods as being very powerful and very fair. He's got an incredible tinkering mind. He works very well with Tyson and the Cyclops. And overall, he's just a pretty solid dude. He helps Percy out. He helps lead him through the labyrinth. He gives them the hint of using Rachel Dare to get through the labyrinth. And overall, he's just a pretty good guy. Next up, in 5th place, we have Hermes, the god of travelers.
From Hercules Bust Head, Season 1.
And Hermes is an interesting case because at first it seems like he's a really horrible guy. Like he doesn't care about Luke and May Castellan at all. Like he's just doing whatever he wants, and he doesn't care enough about them to interact with them or help Luke out at all.
But wait, there's more!
But then over the course of the original series, we get to see more of his story and understand that it's really not his fault, that he knew Luke's entire destiny. Not only the part of it where he would go dark and work with Kronos and allow Kronos to inhabit his body, but also the part where in the end he would ultimately sacrifice himself to save the entire Olympian Council. So Hermes couldn't tell Luke about his destiny. He couldn't interfere. He couldn't help Luke out, because if he did, then Luke wouldn't be able to save the world.
Quite a dilemma.
And things would end up much worse. But as a result, he's forced to leave Luke thinking and feeling like his father doesn't love him or care about him for the majority of the series. And I see Hermes as a very conflicted, very in pain god who really wants to take better care of May and Luke, and who is absolutely devastated when May tries to let the Oracle inhabit her, and that fails. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there's only so much he can do, and he can't interfere. Next up, in fourth place, we have Apollo. And Apollo really is ranked up for me because of his interactions in the Trial of Apollo series. Before that, all we see of him is that he's this pretty superficial and weird and vain guy who just rides around in his sun chariot and is kind of clueless. But then in the Trials of Apollo series, we see him fall down to earth. We see him really get to experience what it means to be a human. And we see him become a much better character as a result of that. He becomes a good guy. He genuinely wants to help those around him. He's genuinely a force for good, and he's willing to sacrifice himself even though he knows he doesn't have immortality anymore as a result of Zeus taking away his powers. And so Apollo is really one of the greatest and nicest and most selfless characters in the series by the time Trials of Apollo has come to an end.
Win-win!
Alright, before I go ahead and give you my top 3 picks for the 3 best gods in the Olympian Council, be sure to let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are. Give me your ranking, or at least some of your favorite and least favorite gods of the council. And don't forget to let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see more Percy Jackson content. Let me know that in the comments down below. In third place, we have Poseidon, Percy Jackson's father, and arguably the Olympian we get to spend the most time with aside from Apollo.
You ever need me, I'll be there for you.
And Poseidon is depicted as a very noble character who cares for Percy, who cares for Percy's mother, who cares for everybody around him, wants to do the right thing. We don't really see him being all that petty or cruel in most circumstances. At worst, one can argue that he's a little bit aloof and distant from Percy, but a lot of that is due to the pact of the big three and him having to maintain his distance from Percy on Zeus's orders. And once Percy is introduced to Poseidon, we see that Poseidon takes an increased interest and spends an increasing amount of time with Percy. So overall, Poseidon is a very noble character who at the end of the day is mostly just trying to do the right thing and be better. Next up, in second place, we have Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. And she is shown to be one of the most noble characters in the entire series, leading the hunters of Artemis, being kind and compassionate and considerate, ultimately being fair and noble in pretty much all scenarios. She ensures that Percy and Annabeth aren't punished after they help save her from Atlas and the Titans. And overall, she's just shown to be a pretty solid, pretty good character.
That's nice.
The reason she's held above Poseidon is a little bit unfair, honestly. She doesn't have any demigod children, and as such, she never is held back by being somewhat aloof or detached from them the way Poseidon is. She has the Hunters of Artemis, and she's shown to be very caring and to spend a lot of time with them and a lot of time caring about them, and honors any of them that fall in combat. So honestly, she's one of the most noble characters in the entire series. But overall, coming in first place, we have Kronos.
My favorite.
Yes, the King of the Titans is shown to be one of the most benevolent characters in the entire series. Absolutely not. No, I can't even try with that.
You think that's funny?
In first place, we actually have Hestia, the goddess of the hearse. And she is shown to be absolutely, arguably, the most noble and selfless character in the entire series. She gives up her seat on the Olympian Council despite being one of the 6 eldest gods in order to maintain peace. She's shown to always be trying to maintain peace and making wise decisions, helping anybody who comes to seek help. She nobly behaves toward everybody around her. She's kind, considerate, compassionate, always helps those who come to her seeking help, honors those. She's happy to go unseen or unappreciated just so long as everything stays good. She serves as the peacemaker in countless scenarios in the series and other scenarios that I'm sure we don't see. She simply is willing to adapt. She's willing to take whatever blows come her way. She's willing to take whatever disrespect anybody dishes out on her, as long as it maintains peace and works in the favor of the greater good. And ultimately, that selfless nature is what makes her the best of the Olympians. So alright, be sure to let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this video, and let me know if you want to see more awesome Percy Jackson content. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notifications bell so you're notified of the next time I upload a super fun ranking. If you want to see me rank the top 20 Harry Potter characters, you can click on this side of the screen. And if you want to find out how Stranger Things and Star Wars may actually take place in the same universe, it makes sense, I promise you, you can click on this side of the screen. But you've only got 3 seconds because the video's about to end. 1, adios!